We open up to the eerie white noise sound of a TV playing a VHS tape, and David puts in a new tape. When the VHS plays, we see that he's watching something from a series from Video Rendezvous. Carla comes on screen, and she introduces herself by talking about some of the things that she loves to do. David writes down some key points about her in an official workbook that goes along with the video series. Is this like an equivalent to online dating? Can you actually find VHSs like this out there? These would have to be collector's items by now. Next, Mary comes on screen, and she brings her ventriloquist dummy with her as her hidden talent that will help her find a date. David quickly fast-forwards past her, and Susan is next. When she comes up, David closes his workbook and listens to her talk about what she's looking for in a partner. Susan's clip seems to be the most genuine, but when she mentions that her potential partner can't be living in his parents' basement, David turns off the tape and looks around his basement room. When David goes upstairs, we meet his mother sitting in her chair while she watches the news, and he asks what she wants for lunch. David makes her some macaroni and cheese, and he serves it to her on her TV tray. He sits on an ottoman next to her chair, and he starts to feed her until she tells him that she can feed herself. She ends up burning her mouth, and she calls him Frank in the process. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but it looks like she might suffer from dementia, so whether or not David lives in her basement as a way to be there to take care of her, or if he's been there since childhood and never moved out, remains a mystery. After lunch, David does some chores around the house, and his mother continues watching news about the potential launch of the first space mission to Mars. Later, David calls the Video Rendezvous office, and he speaks with Diane about whether or not he's had any matches yet from other daters. She tells him that he hasn't had any luck as of yet, but she notices that it's been more than 6 months since he made a tape. David heads out to go to the office to record a new tape for circulation, and when he starts his recording, he starts off by saying that he has to be there for his mother 24/7 since she has dementia. Once he's done, the man recording tells him that he has to re-record it to fit the 30-second time frame, and his second run is definitely nowhere near as good as his first recording. Well, that's unfair. His first take was genuine, and his second take made him look like he couldn't form a sentence that was longer than 3 words. When David goes to pay for his session, Diane gives him a whole new set of women's tapes for him to watch when he gets home, and she gives him the cold shoulder as she returns to her job. While he waits for her to get off the phone, he notices a bin of bargain videos, and one of them is called Rent-A-Pal. He adds it to the stack of videos he takes home, and he puts it in the VCR first once he gets to his room. When it starts to play, Andy comes on screen, and he introduces himself as someone that's simply here to be David's friend. Andy talks about how he's been waiting for this moment forever, and he's so happy that David decided to take this journey with him. Andy assures him that they're going to have some fun, but they're interrupted when the smoke alarm goes off upstairs. After putting the fire out, he goes to the living room where his mother is trying to open the locked door to take a walk, and he starts to feel a bit overwhelmed. After taking a deep breath, he decides to throw on a movie for the two of them, but when he goes to his room to get the tape, he gets an uneasy feeling from the paused screen of Andy. Without touching the remote, Andy starts to play again, and David turns off the TV. David heads back upstairs to watch the classic movie with his mom, and she talks about watching the movie for the first time when David was a baby. After the movie, David gets his mom ready for bed, and he winds up sitting and drinking after trying to clean the stove from the fire damage. Eventually, he finds his way back to the basement, and he turns Andy back on. This time he actually answers back to Andy's questions as though he can actually hear him. Amazingly, all of Andy's answers actually coincide with David's prompts. The best part is when Andy goes to pretend to take a look around David's room, David actually hides the bottle of alcohol like he's being judged by a pre-recorded videotape. Eventually, Andy starts talking about himself, and David starts to really connect with him when he starts to talk about how his mother used to spank him. The two of them actually laugh over shared trauma, but David ends up turning off the TV once he realizes that he's not actually making a real connection. He goes to the closet to pull out a box full of his dad's old reels, and he fires up the old projector to go down memory lane. No, that label was wrong. It's just dirty movies. I was horribly wrong. Hey, that might have been one of his dad's old reels for all I know, though. The next day, David is woken up by the phone ringing, and he comes upstairs to find his mother already in her chair. He listens to messages that he missed, and it turns out that Diane called about a potential match she may have found for David. Obviously, David rushes out of the house to pick up the tape at the Video Rendezvous, but once he gets there, he realizes that he forgot his wallet at home. David rushes home to grab it, but when he gets back, he finds out that the potential match ended up just matching with someone else. He asks to take the tape home so that he can at least see what he missed out on, and he goes to his room to watch it. Wow, she probably would have actually been a perfect match for him. When she mentions that she was a caregiver, David knows that he missed out on his one shot. So close yet so far away. David isn't taking this too well, but he heads upstairs to feed his mom dinner. That night, David grabs another bottle of alcohol and heads downstairs to watch the Rent-A-Pal video again. This time, David seems to be more open to talking with Andy, but they're interrupted when Andy's phone starts ringing over and over. He apologizes for the interruption, and after listening to David talk about what his mom was like, he tries to change the subject to something more uplifting. Andy asks about David's love life, but that's not much less depressing. When David talks about missing his match, Andy tells him that he can relate. Andy tells David a story about how he missed out on a date back at prom, but when he's at the prom, he sees the date that stood him up dancing with someone else. So Andy might be a little maniacal. I'm sure that's no surprise for any of us, but it's about now that you can kind of see it. What's really weird is that the audio actually changes from time to time. Sometimes Andy sounds like he's a VHS tape, and other times it sounds like he's right behind David. David is uplifted after listening to Andy's story, and the two of them do a toast to their newfound friendship before the tape rewinds. Over time, David rewatches the tape over and over until their conversation is fluid. Eventually, the tape adds new content, and Andy starts telling jokes and playing Go Fish with David. The more David listens to the tape over and over, the happier David seems in real life. David plays the tape so much that the film starts to melt and distort in the VCR. One night, David gets pulled out of a daze while he's watching the tape, and we hear Andy ask a new question. He asks to hear the most embarrassing story from David's childhood. David tells him about a crush he had back in 6th grade, but it turns out that a lot of the other kids sent false notes to the girl with lewd messages. These aren't just lewd messages. These kids were writing that David snuck into the girl's room at night and that he wants to make babies with her. Man, 6th grade was intense. When David finishes telling his story, Andy gives him a hard time about it, but Andy tells his embarrassing story next. Andy talks about his love escapades in college, and David seems to be getting excited while listening to his story. In fact, David unbuckles his belt, and he begins to play with himself while Andy continues describing in extreme detail. In the middle of his story, Andy actually puts David's name into the story, but just as Andy talks about how he was busted, David's mom walks in and busts David. All she sees is David's dad where David stands, and David has to scream the truth into her face. He tells her that his dad committed suicide, and he reminds her that he's all that she has left. After hearing this, his mother collapses to the floor and cries her heart out, but David holds her and tries to comfort her. David turns off the tape to spend a moment with his mother, and she recognizes him for the first time. After David takes his mom upstairs and takes care of her, the phone rings in the kitchen, and David answers to find Diane on the other end. She calls to tell him that the girl he missed out on actually didn't match well with the other guy, and Diane tells him that Lisa wants to meet him for a date on Thursday. David couldn't be happier, and the next day he goes to clean the car for his big date. He heads to Skateland to meet with Lisa, and he gives her a rose when she arrives. The second that the two go onto the rink to skate, David falls to the ground, and the two of them decide to go grab a bite to eat next. Lisa notices some habits of David's that point to the fact that he does take care of his mom, and things start to take a sour turn when she mentions that David should think about his own happiness before his care turns into resentment. I wasn't expecting some existential crisis conversation in this movie. I just figured that all this movie would be was a whole bunch of is the tape conscious or is he crazy? This movie got deep where it didn't have to. Kudos to the writers. As the night continues, the two new lovers have a fantastic date, and Lisa asks him if he wants to go out tomorrow night. David agrees to meet her, and she writes her number on a Polaroid that they took earlier. David goes to pick up his mother from the senior center, and they head straight home. After putting her to bed, David heads downstairs to turn on the tape with Andy. He rewinds back a bit until he gets to the point where Andy asks for details on his story. David sits down and tells Andy all about his date. But when Andy really starts to respond with specific points, David gets a little reserved. Andy takes this as a sign that David is done with him, but David assures him that they're still best friends. Andy tells him that Lisa is coming between them already, but in the end, David tells him that he'll call Lisa to reschedule. So, like I said, is Andy a supernatural tape or is David just losing his mind? Just when you think you understand what's going on, it throws a wrench into the mix. The next day, David paces around outside until he decides to go through with rescheduling with Lisa. He heads into the kitchen to call her, and he uses his mom as a scapegoat for rescheduling. They decide on Saturday instead, and Lisa tries to tell him that she understands the situation. David feels terrible for doing this to Lisa, but he heads downstairs to play cards with Andy like he promised. Once the game is done, David heads upstairs to see if he can get his mom a snack before bed, but she doesn't answer him. When he goes to the living room to check on her, he finds the front door wide open, and he rushes to the car to try and find her around the neighborhood. Eventually, he gets to a phone booth, and he decides to call Lisa to see if she can help him. Lisa's the perfect partner. Get rid of Andy and make room for Lisa. Phone booths, though. Why did they ever take those away? Lisa tells him to think about a place his mom would have gone to when she had her mind still, and they wind up finding her at a bus stop, waiting to go see her dead husband at the studio. With Lisa's help, they talk her into getting into the car, and the three of them head home to get her into bed. Once it's just the two of them, David and Lisa sigh a sigh of relief, and they head down to his basement room with a drink in hand. David thanks her for helping him through the night, and the two of them sit on his couch while listening to a tape of his dad playing the piano. The two of them start getting more comfortable with each other, but while they're going at it, David's butt turns on the TV to reveal Andy watching them. Andy's face changes frame by frame, and I'm 100% convinced that this tape is processed or something. Also, David ends up busting from Lisa touching halfway up his leg. Andy laughs uncontrollably, and that solidifies things. When Lisa questions him on what Andy was, David gets super defensive, and Lisa decides that it's best if she just leaves. David sits on the couch all night until morning, and while he sits with his mom in the kitchen, Lisa calls and leaves a message on the answering machine. Lisa wants to apologize and talk about whatever happened the night before, but David erases the message while he continues his usual errands. Later, David cleans up his room, and he throws away the Polaroid with Lisa's number. When he goes to check the VCR for Andy's tape, he finds it empty, and he goes on a scavenger hunt in the house. When he gets to the kitchen, he finds his mom doing an art project, but he realizes that she's using the film from Andy's tape. When his mom laughs at him for getting upset, he hits her in the face with the VHS tape. There's that resentment Lisa talked about. He just leaves her there too. David's completely lost it. He hasn't lost enough of his mind to at least not try and pay for another copy of Rent-A-Pal though. When he gets home, he walks right over to his mother to see if the new tape will give him Andy, and sure enough, Andy pops right up. As David listens to Andy, he ends up getting persuaded to play a new game, and he goes upstairs to play it with his mom. He helps her to her feet, and he leads her to the stairs to the basement. Just as she looks at him, she recognizes her son, and he kisses her forehead before pushing her down the stairs. Suddenly, Andy pops up on the TVs upstairs, and he tells David that all they need is each other. Just then, David is pulled out of his trance by the sound of Lisa's voice, and he turns around to find her in the kitchen. When he talks to Lisa, it's almost as if Andy is actually speaking through him, and he approaches Lisa in the kitchen. The mother's screams coming from the basement is what it takes for Lisa to get worried. David's creepy stance in the dark would have been enough for me though. While she tries to escape while slipping on the lasagna that she brought, David grabs Andy's film to strangle her, but she hits him to get free. She grabs scissors off the table and stabs him right in the chest. David stumbles into the basement past his dead mother, and he sits on the couch to play the ending of the tape one more time. Andy tells him that he had a great time being his friend, but he knows that it's time for him to go. With that, David breathes his last breath, and Andy says, "So long." Then, the credits roll. Wow. As subtle as the film was, it was fantastic. Every bit was right on the money. Give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.